In August of 2009, 22-year-old graduate Camille Harper and her 28-year-old husband Ryan disappeared without a trace while on their honeymoon in the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas. 7 months of intense searching yielded no results until, in March of 2010, a random hunter stumbled upon a camouflaged entrance to an abandoned bunker in Boxley Valley. What he saw inside shocked the whole country. Camilla was alive, but exhausted and 7 months pregnant. But her husband was not with her. What secrets the abandoned bunker hides, what fate actually befell Ryan Harper, and what happened during those 7 months in complete isolation, you will find out in this story. The events in this story are presented as a narrative interpretation. Some elements have been altered or recreated for storytelling purposes. On August 23, 2009, the sun rose early in the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas, promising a humid and grueling day. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the temperature had already crossed 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity made the air thick and heavy, as is often the case in the southern states in late summer. It was at this time that a silver SUV driven by 22-year-old Camilla Harper and her 28-year-old husband Ryan pulled into the service station in the town of Ponca City for one last stop before entering the wilderness, according to a surveillance camera. The video recording, which later became part of the investigation materials, shows Ryan refueling the car and Camilla buying 2 bottles of water and a package of nutritional bars. The girl was wearing a lightweight sports shirt and shorts, and a bright pink university-type backpack was hanging on her shoulder. Ryan, according to the gas station cashier, looked calm and focused. In his official statement, the station employee noted that the couple exchanged a few words about the route to the Whitaker Point Trail, which leads to the famous rocky outcropping of Hawksbill Crag. This place is considered a landmark of the Ozarks, but the path to it runs through dense forests and steep rocky slopes. According to Ryan's sister, he was an experienced hiker who had hiked the Cascade Mountains many times, so the trip to Ozark did not seem dangerous to the family. 11:30 in the morning was the last confirmed time of activity on their cell phones. According to the cellular operator's statement, the last signal was recorded by a tower near the Whitaker Point trailhead, after which the devices of both Newlyweds stopped connecting to the network, which is typical for this terrain area with deep gullies and a continuous tree canopy. The road to Hawksbill Crag passes through areas of old-growth forest, where the undergrowth is so dense that even during the day, it is twilight. The path winds along the cliffs, and sandstone is constantly crumbling underfoot. According to a reconstruction made later from the words of another tourist who came down from the ledge at about 1 in the afternoon, he saw a young couple moving up. The man and woman matched the description of Camilla and Ryan. The witness emphasized that Camilla was walking slightly ahead, and Ryan was carrying a large, dark-colored backpack. They greeted each other and looked like people enjoying the scenery. The witness did not notice any signs of anxiety or the presence of unauthorized persons. The couple was expected to return to their rented cottage in the town of Jasper by 9 o'clock in the evening. However, at 10:00 in the evening, when the Newlyweds' phones were still out of reach, Patricia Harper, Camilla's mother, felt what she later described to detectives as physical pain in her chest. In her statement, she noted that her daughter had always been extremely responsible and would never have allowed herself to miss an evening call, especially during her honeymoon. The next morning, August 24th, at 6 o'clock in the morning, Patricia called the Newton County Sheriff's Office. The first search party arrived at the Whitaker Point trailhead at 8:45 in the morning. They found the Harper's silver SUV in the parking lot. The car was locked and there were no signs of a struggle inside. A box of wedding gifts and an envelope with cash for emergency expenses were left in the back seat. 20 volunteers, a group of National Park Rangers, and a canine unit were involved in the operation. The dogs picked up the trail from the parking lot, but it broke off after 2 miles at a point where the trail crosses a rocky outcrop. Hot weather and dry winds quickly destroyed the biological traces. The helicopter, which was lifted in the afternoon, could only see the treetops, but the dense forest reliably hid what was happening on the ground. The turning point came on the second day of the search. At 11 o'clock 40 minutes in the morning, one of the volunteers noticed a bright spot on the edge of a steep slope, a few hundred feet from the main route. It was Camilla's pink backpack. It was lying on the rocks in an unnatural position, as if it had been thrown in a hurry or dropped during a fall. A bottle of water, sunscreen, and Camilla's camera were found inside the backpack. An inspection of the surrounding area was inconclusive. No traces of blood, clothing fibers, or signs that anyone had slid down the slope. The sheriff's report classified the incident as a disappearance under unexplained circumstances. Police began to consider the possibility that the disappearance had been staged. The detectives were alarmed by the fact that Ryan's second backpack with his basic belongings, tent, and maps was never found. The theory was that the couple could have deliberately left some of their belongings behind to simulate an accident and start a new life without obligations. However, Camilla's parents angrily rejected this assumption. Patricia Harper stated during the interrogation, "My daughter had just graduated and was making plans for the future. She would never put us through this hell of her own free will." By the end of the first week of the search, the area within a 5-mile radius around Whitaker Point had been combed 3 times. Police interviewed all the hikers who had signed in at the visitor log that weekend, but no one had seen the couple after 1 in the afternoon on August 23rd. The slope where the backpack was found became for the people of Jasper the personification of a mystery that the Ozark forest was in no hurry to reveal. The eerie silence that prevailed at the site of the discovery only increased the tension. The 2 young men disappeared among the trees, leaving no sound, no cry for help, as if nature itself had wiped them off the map. March of 2010 in Arkansas was unusually wet. The snow in the Ozark Mountains had begun to melt, turning forest trails into streams of mud, and the fog in the Boxley Valley was so thick in the mornings that visibility was less than 20 feet. For the residents of the surrounding towns, the story of Camille and Ryan Harper's disappearance has already become one of those sad legends that are common in this region. The case has officially become a cold case. Newspaper headlines that used to be full of photos of the smiling couple have been replaced by reports on local elections and economic news. Patrols of the Whitaker Point neighborhood had been suspended in November, and the girl's pink backpack was kept in an evidence box in the basement of the police station. On March 20, 2010, at approximately 9:30 in the morning, the situation changed forever. 45-year-old Jacob Miller, a local hunter with 30 years of experience, was tracking game in a remote sector of the Boxley Valley, about 15 miles from where Camilla's belongings had been found 7 months earlier. According to the report of his interrogation, Miller noticed a strange terrain configuration. A small hill, densely overgrown with brush, had an unnaturally flat side. When the hunter got closer, he noticed a rusty metal edge under a layer of wet moss and branches. It was the entrance to an old abandoned bunker built during the Cold War I of those private shelters that were massively built in the mid-20th century. The heavy steel door was covered with earth and camouflaged so thoroughly that one could walk past it hundreds of times without suspecting anything. That morning, however, the door was a few inches ajar. Miller, smelling the pungent odor of stale air and iron, decided to check the room, suspecting that a poacher or a lost animal might be hiding there. What he saw when the beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness of the concrete room, no more than 150 square feet, left him speechless. In the far corner, a figure sat on a metal bed covered with dirty woolen blankets. It was a woman, but she barely resembled a human being. The police report, according to Miller, stated that her skin was so pale that it appeared almost translucent, as if she had not seen sunlight in years. Her long hair, which had once been neatly trimmed, had turned into a tangled mess of dust and dirt. The woman did not try to escape or call for help. She just sat there, staring into the void in front of her with dilated pupils that barely reacted to the bright light of the flashlight. When the hunter cautiously approached and called her name, she slowly turned her head, but there was no recognition or relief in her eyes, only total mental absence. The biggest shock for Miller was that under the rags of her clothes, she was clearly pregnant in late pregnancy. Jacob Miller immediately contacted emergency services via the satellite phone he always took with him into the woods. At 11 o'clock, 15 minutes in the morning, the first ambulance and sheriff's deputies arrived at the entrance to the bunker. The doctors who first examined the woman on the spot confirmed her identity by the scar on her left knee and the characteristic shape of her face. It was 22-year-old Camille Harper, who had disappeared 210 days earlier. Ryan Harper was not in the bunker. The room looked like an isolated world where time had stopped. The shelves were lined with rows of empty cans, old plastic water cans, and a few packs of vitamins. The air was heavy and humid, and the only source of light, according to investigators, was a dim kerosene lamp standing on a wooden box near the bed. Camilla's physical condition caused doctors to draw contradictory conclusions. On the one hand, she was extremely emaciated, with signs of vitamin deficiency and muscle atrophy due to prolonged confinement. On the other hand, her pregnancy, which had been going on for about 8 months, was developing without any visible critical pathologies, indicating that someone had been providing her with the minimum necessary food and water throughout this time. It took more than 2 hours to transport her to the nearest medical center in Harrison City due to the difficult terrain. She did not speak a word during the entire trip. The paramedic who was in the car with her later noted in a report that Camilla flinched at every siren and covered her eyes with her hands in an attempt to hide from the daylight, which now seemed hostile to her. The news of the discovery instantly spread throughout Newton County. Dozens of journalists and Camilla's relatives gathered outside the hospital. Patricia Harper, seeing her daughter on a stretcher, according to eyewitnesses, fainted. Her child had returned, but it was not the same radiant girl she had seen off on her honeymoon in August. Before them was a shadow, a man whose consciousness had been shattered by being in a concrete grave. The detectives who arrived at the bunker for the initial inspection noticed one detail. The bunker door had a massive external bolt that could only be opened from the outside. This meant that Camilla was not just hiding there. She was a prisoner. The absence of Ryan and any of his personal belongings in the room raised thousands of questions. On the floor of the bunker, forensic experts found only one set of shoes, Camilla's women's sneakers, which had been completely worn out. When asked about the whereabouts of her husband, the girl only clutched the blanket tighter and began to tremble slightly. Everything indicated that these 7 months had been filled not only with physical isolation, but also with something much worse, which she could not talk about at the moment. At the end of the day, on March 20th, the police officially announced a change in the status of the case. Now it was not just a disappearance, but a kidnapping and prolonged detention. The Boxley Valley, which had previously been just a scenic route for tourists, turned into a crime scene that hid the mystery of Camilla Harper's 7-month stay in the darkness of a dungeon. While doctors fought for the stability of her condition and that of her unborn child, detectives began a detailed description of every inch of the bunker, hoping to find the answer to the main question: who locked the door from the outside? On March 21, 2010, the Harrison Regional Medical Center was surrounded by a tight ring of police cordon. Ward 4, located at the end of the north wing on the 3rd floor, had become the most heavily guarded facility in the state. After 7 months in complete darkness and isolation, 22-year-old Camilla Harper was getting used to a world with walls, electric lights, and the sound of human voices. However, her return to civilization turned out to be much more difficult than the doctors had anticipated. According to the service records of the senior nurse, Ellen Rodriguez, who was on duty the first night after her hospitalization, Camilla's behavior caused deep anxiety among the staff. The report states that the girl sat for hours on the edge of the bed, not changing her position and not taking her eyes off the closed door. The most eerie discovery was the so-called permission reflex. When the nurse brought dinner and put a glass of water on the bedside table, Camille did not touch the food or drink, despite her obvious physical exhaustion. She waited. Only after the staff directly said the phrase, "You can eat, Camille," she began to eat slowly. This was indicative of the total psychological torture and complete suppression of will that is commonly observed in victims of long-term detention. On March 22nd at 10 o'clock in the morning, a group of obstetricians conducted a full examination of the girl. The results of the ultrasound confirmed that Camille was 30 weeks pregnant, which corresponds to approximately 7 months. This meant that the conception had taken place during the honeymoon period, shortly before the disappearance or in the first weeks of her stay in the forest. A day later, the laboratory provided the results of a DNA test, which used samples from Ryan Harper's personal belongings stored in the police archive as evidence. The analysis confirmed that Ryan was the child's biological father. This news caused a wave of conflicting emotions among the relatives who were on duty in the hospital corridor. For them, it was both a ray of hope and a new source of horror. On the same day, at 14 hours and 30 minutes, detectives from the district police entered Ward 4. They attempted to conduct the first official interrogation, hoping to obtain information about Ryan's whereabouts. However, the conversation, recorded on a dictaphone, resembled an investigator's monologue, interrupted by long pauses and the victim's soft whispers. When Detective Miller asked directly about the whereabouts of her husband, Camille fell into a state of stupor. Her breathing became shallow and her eyes glassy. According to the detectives who later commented for the internal investigation, the girl started talking about him. She described her supervisor in the masculine gender, but never mentioned him by name. She recalled how he brought her canned food, how he put plastic jars of vitamins on the shelf, forcing her to swallow them under supervision. The memories of the punishment system were especially painful. Camille said that the bunker had a primitive ventilation system that was controlled by the captor from the outside. If she cried too loudly or tried to scream, he simply opened the flaps, letting in the icy mountain air. The temperature in the dungeon instantly dropped to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the girl was forced to shiver for hours under a thin blanket until she fell silent from cold and exhaustion. Camille's silence about the identity of him and the complete absence of any trace of Ryan Harper in the bunker house gave rise to a terrifying theory among the public and in police circles. Local newspapers in Jasper began to speculate that Ryan could have been the one who organized the kidnapping. Investigators analyzed the version of a psychotic break. Perhaps the young man, unable to withstand the pressure of his future adult life, decided to hide his wife from the world in order to create his own isolated reality. This version was fueled by the fact that Ryan was an experienced hiker, knew the forest, and had survival skills, and forensic experts did not find any fingerprints of any unauthorized person in the bunker itself, only smeared glove marks near the front door. There was talk in the city that Ryan could have staged the attack at the very beginning, thrown away Camille's pink backpack to distract her, and then dragged her into the pre-prepared shelter by force. The police re-examined all of Ryan's financial accounts for the period before his disappearance, looking for purchases of large quantities of canned food or equipment, but found nothing suspicious. The man's relatives were in despair. They could not believe that a man who loved Camille so devotedly was capable of such sophisticated cruelty. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Ward 4 was depressing. Camille refused to watch TV or read the press. It was as if she was still in that concrete room, where the only reality was the voice coming from the darkness at the entrance. Every time the medical staff entered the room, she would flinch, as if she was expecting the same figure who had kept her imprisoned for 7 long months to reappear instead of a doctor. The investigation was at a standstill. They had a victim who could not give a clear description and no suspect except for a man who was officially missing himself. The question of whether Ryan Harper was a torturer or another victim remained open, and the silence in the hospital room only emphasized the magnitude of the mystery that lay deep beneath the roots of the trees in the Boxley Valley. Friends, before we get to the most gruesome part of this story, please subscribe to the channel, like it, and leave a comment. Your activity helps YouTube's algorithms to promote the video so that it can be seen by as many people as possible. Thank you for being with us. On March 21st, 2010, at 8 o'clock in the morning, the area around the abandoned bunker in the Boxley Valley was officially closed to outsiders. The investigative team, led by leading Arkansas state criminalist David Lambert, began a detailed examination of the facility that had been Camilla Harper's prison for 210 days. According to the scene investigation report, the bunker was a reinforced concrete structure 10 feet deep in the ground, with a total area of about 150 square feet. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy and damp, and the walls were covered with a thin layer of condensation that dripped down to form dark spots on the floor. What the experts saw inside gave them mixed feelings. The space was arranged with a methodical care that bordered on obsession. On a small wooden box that served as a table, the forensic experts recorded 2 plates and 2 sets of cutlery. On the metal bed were 2 woolen blankets, neatly folded on top of each other. In the corner of the bunker, they found significant supplies of food, more than 400 cans of canned meat, 40 gallons of filtered water in plastic canisters, and a large number of packages of dry rations. This amount of resources indicated that the kidnapper had not just spontaneously seized the girl, but had been preparing the place for a long stay of 2 people for many months. However, this seeming care hid the cruel reality of imprisonment. The main physical evidence was an external steel bolt on the door. Lambert's report indicated that the mechanism was lubricated and operated silently, allowing the kidnapper to lock Camilla inside unnoticed. The only source of fresh air, a narrow ventilation pipe, was protected by metal grills on the surface. The entire system was designed to keep the victim completely isolated from the outside world, with no chance of escape or signaling. The biggest shock for the investigation was the complete absence of biological traces of Ryan Harper inside the bunker. Over the course of 3 days, experts removed more than 600 fingerprints from all possible surfaces: cans, walls, pens, and utensils. All identified prints belonged exclusively to Camilla. Only blurred traces of textile gloves were found on the items used by the man. Neither Ryan's hair nor particles of his epidermis nor any personal belongings were found, except for those that Camilla had with her on the day of her disappearance. This created a critical contradiction. The girl in the hospital claimed that a man had been with her at all times, but physical evidence indicated that this person had been professionally careful and left no trace of his presence. The main mystery unfolded outside the bunker. On March 22nd at 9:30 in the morning, a search team with dogs discovered a chain of fresh shoe prints leading from the camouflaged entrance toward the Buffalo River. According to soil analysis, the tracks had been left several hours before Hunter Jacob Miller discovered Camilla. The prints belonged to heavy hiking boots of size 11. The footprints showed a steady, calm step. The person was not running away, but confidently moving in one direction, toward the water. Near the riverbank, the tracks broke off. This discovery stumped the detectives. If it was Ryan, why did he leave his pregnant wife at the very moment when her condition became critical? And where did he go without taking any of the things from the bunker? The silence at the crime scene was so exhaustive that the lost couple version began to fall apart. Investigators began to question Ryan's very presence in the Boxley Valley in recent months. In the hospital room, Camilla continued to talk about him, describing a male figure who brought her food and vitamins, who punished her with cold and watched her in the dark. But she never once identified this person as her husband. Every time the detective said the name Ryan, she simply looked away, as if the name no longer had any relevance to her. Newton County Sheriff's Department Detective Mark Wilson, in his March 24th memo, said, "We are dealing with an anomaly. All the circumstantial evidence points to the presence of a second person, but no direct evidence links that person to Ryan Harper. It's as if Camilla was living in a bunker with a ghost who knew how to care for her, but left no evidence of his existence other than his prints on the riverbank." The public, which had previously been sympathetic to Ryan, now began to perceive him as a major threat. There were suggestions in the local press that the man could have changed his appearance or used special means to avoid leaving DNA traces. However, the investigation could not ignore the fact that 2 plates were found in the bunker. This meant that the kidnapper shared a meal with Camilla, sat across from her, perhaps talked to her. But he left into the darkness of the forest just as help appeared on the doorstep, as if he knew exactly when the hunter would arrive. The Buffalo River, where the tracks led, was full and fast in March, making further tracking of the kidnapper's route impossible. The mystery of Ryan Harper's disappearance and the mysterious figure of the bunker owner became the center of the investigation, which with each passing day became less and less like a story of rescue and more like a complex game of an unknown manipulator. On March 28, 2010, Camilla Harper's condition at Harrison Regional Medical Center began to stabilize. Though she still avoided direct sunlight and flinched at sharp sounds, she agreed for the first time to an extended interview with Dr. Sarah Miller, a leading crisis psychologist. This session was to be pivotal in understanding exactly what had happened in the bunker house over the course of 7 months, as the physical evidence at the crime scene left more questions than answers. According to Dr. Miller's official report, which was later included in the court file, Camilla described her life in the dark as existing in a world of sounds. Since her abductor never turned on the full light when he came inside, Camilla could only see his silhouette against the background of a dim kerosene lamp or the light of a flashlight shining in her face. In her testimony, she said that he always stayed at least 6 feet away from her bed, and his movements were so precise that she could not even hear the rustle of his clothes. However, the most significant discovery of the session was the information about verbal contact. The kidnapper was not silent. According to Camilla, he spent hours telling her about the forest, the weather outside, and that the world around her has become too dangerous. During the reconstruction of the conversation, Camilla suddenly interrupted the story, and according to the psychologist's notes, her voice changed to a trembling whisper. She stated verbatim, "That was not Ryan's voice. That voice was right. It was like I had known him all my life, but it sounded different than before." This phrase about the correctness of the voice shocked the investigators. It indicated that Camilla had subconsciously identified the kidnapper as someone from her circle of acquaintances, but the trauma and manipulation did not allow her to say a specific name. Meanwhile, a breakthrough was made at the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory in Little Rock. On March 30th, 2010, experts released the results of a second, more thorough analysis of the microparticles found under the metal bed in the bunker. Despite the fact that the main surfaces had been thoroughly wiped clean, a single human hair and a fragment of epithelium were found in the gap between the concrete wall and the bed frame. The DNA profile of these samples unequivocally confirmed that they belonged to a male unauthorized person who was not Ryan Harper. This discovery instantly changed the vector of the entire investigation. On the same day, at 16 hours 00 minutes, the Newton County Sheriff held an emergency press briefing to officially announce the change in Ryan Harper's status from prime suspect to alleged victim. The police admitted that the previous version of the man's psychotic break was false. A new, much more terrifying theory emerged. In August 2009, the couple was kidnapped together on the Whitaker Point Trail, but later separated. Investigators began to analyze the possibility of how one person could neutralize the 28-year-old Ryan, who was well fit. A tactical analysis specialist suggested that the attacker could have used the effect of surprise or a firearm to force the couple to submit. The theory that Ryan was killed immediately or held elsewhere became a priority. Search teams returned to the Boxley Valley area, but now they were not looking for a living man, but for signs of a struggle or hidden burial sites. Detective Wilson, while studying Camilla's session notes, noticed another detail. The girl mentioned that the kidnapper knew about her food preferences and even brought certain types of vitamins that she had been taking before she disappeared. This indicated that the perpetrator had not just met the couple by chance in the woods, but had been following them for a long time, studying their habits and personal lives. The report stated, "We are dealing with a person who has knowledge of the victim that goes beyond a casual acquaintance. This is someone who was there for her, someone whose voice did not cause Camilla's initial fear until it was too late." The public, which just a few days ago had been demanding the arrest of a crazy man, was now terrified of an unknown serial manipulator. The question who became a key one not only for the police, but for the entire Arkansas community. Every name from Camille and Ryan's circle of friends and family began to be re-examined. Friends, former classmates, and work colleagues. The investigation realized that the killer or kidnapper could have been among those who sympathized with the family or even participated in the first search operations. In Ward 4, Camilla Harper continued to struggle with her memories. Her baby was due in a few weeks, and the realization that her baby's father might be dead and that his killer was a man with the right voice was a new stage of psychological torture for her. The police began to compile a list of all the people who had access to geodetic maps of the Boxley area or were professionally involved in the study of old military facilities in Ozark. The circle of suspects began to narrow, but the face of the man who had reigned over Camilla's life in darkness for 7 months was still hidden in the shadow of the concrete walls. In early April of 2010, the Harper investigation reached a critical point in what detectives commonly refer to as the dead zone. Despite the presence of a foreign DNA profile and Camilla's testimony about a mysterious watcher, the police had no suspects whose biometric data matched the samples they had obtained. The law enforcement database yielded no results, which meant only one thing. The man who had kept the girl in the bunker for 7 months had never been on the radar of the law before. At this point, the Newton County Sheriff's Office decided to go back to the beginning, re-interviewing the entire family's immediate family. Among those who once again appeared to testify was 29-year-old Trevor Klein. Throughout the time since the couple's disappearance, Trevor had been considered the epitome of loyalty and reliability. He was a longtime family friend who from day one became the shadow of Patricia Harper, Camilla's mother. According to volunteers' recollections, it was Klein who organized night vigils, printed thousands of wanted notices, and bought coffee and food for the search teams at his own expense. Reports stated that Trevor spent 12 hours a day at the search headquarters, demonstrating his willingness to help with anything from analyzing maps to providing simple emotional support to the grieving mother. On April 5, 2010, at approximately 11:30 in the morning, Trevor Klein arrived at the Harrison Regional Medical Center. The official purpose of his visit was to meet with lead detective Mark Wilson, who was at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor, directly across from room number 4. Klein had to clarify the details of his movements on the day of the couple's disappearance, as the investigation was checking the alibis of anyone who knew the Harpers' route to Whitaker Point Rock. At the same moment, Camilla Harper, accompanied by a physiotherapist, went out into the hallway for the first time in a long time to perform a rehabilitation exercise. The girl moved slowly, holding the handrail, her eyes fixed on the floor. The corridor was almost empty, and every sound in the sterile silence of the hospital wing echoed off the tiled walls with dry clarity. According to Detective Wilson's testimony in his report that day, Trevor Kline, with his back to Camilla, was discussing the situation in the Jasper Township with the investigator. At a certain point in the conversation, Kline uttered a phrase that was later analyzed many times by linguists and psychologists. "We're all tired, Mark. Perhaps it's time for us all to accept the inevitable and realize the need to move on." Camilla's reaction was instantaneous and so strong that the medical staff initially suspected a sudden epileptic seizure. As noted in the victim's medical record, the girl stopped abruptly. Her breathing became frequent and intermittent, turning into hyperventilation. The pupils dilated so much that they almost completely covered the iris. A visible tremor spread throughout her body, starting in her hands and quickly spreading to her entire body. Camilla began to back away, as if she were trying to squeeze into a wall, keeping her eyes on Trevor Kline's back. When Kline began to slowly turn toward the sound of her heavy breathing, she let out a soft, almost inaudible whisper that everyone present could hear. "It's him. It's that voice." She repeated these words with growing terror until her legs gave out and she slumped to the floor, covering her ears with her hands. At 13 hours 45 minutes that afternoon, Detective Wilson initiated an emergency meeting with the department's leadership. The main topic was not only the incident at the hospital, but also how Trevor Kline reacted to the identification. According to eyewitnesses, when Camilla pointed him out, Kline's expression did not change. He showed no fear, no surprise, no desire to help. He just stood there and looked at the girl with a cold, studying gaze, which the detective later described as the look of an owner who has seen disobedience. According to psychologist Sarah Miller, who was urgently called to the ward after the incident, Camilla was in a state of acute stress. She claimed that she recognized not just a timbre or intonation, but a specific rhythm of speech and manner of accentuation that she had been studying for 7 months in the complete darkness of the bunker. "The voice that seemed right to me in my madness underground has now become my greatest terror," Dr. Miller reported the girl's words. The police began an urgent covert background check on Trevor Kline. The first results, obtained by the evening of April 5th, were alarming. Trevor was not just a family friend. He was a person who had remained on the periphery of Camilla's life for many years, always present but never intrusive. Kline's colleagues at the surveying company, where he worked for more than 5 years, described him as a man with a perfect memory for the terrain and a passion for old military maps. Of particular interest to the investigation was the fact that 2 months before the disappearance of Camilla and Ryan, Kline traveled to the Boxley Valley area several times, allegedly for private topographic research. No official orders for these works were recorded in his company. Thus, the image of the model friend who had been bringing coffee to the volunteers and supporting the victim's mother for 7 months began to rapidly collapse. The detectives realized that all this time, the killer or kidnapper was not just hiding in the woods. He was at the very center of the investigation, having access to information about the progress of the search and Camilla's condition. His presence next to Patricia Harper no longer looked like an act of mercy, but a way to control the situation from the inside. The investigation now faced an extremely difficult task: to find irrefutable evidence that would link Trevor Kline to the bunker in the Boxley Valley. Because the mere words of Camilla, whose psychological state was extremely unstable, were not enough to make an official arrest. The girl's instincts had pointed to a predator, but now the law had to prove that this predator had indeed left its tracks in the darkness. On April 6, 2010, the Newton County Sheriff's Office obtained a search warrant for the private residence and garage of 29-year-old Trevor Kline. After an incident at the hospital where Camilla Harper recognized his voice, the investigation began to examine in detail the biography of the man who had skillfully played the role of a compassionate family friend for 7 months. The results of the investigation were startling. Trevor Klein was a professional surveyor with many years of experience who specialized in mapping hard-to-reach areas of Arkansas. His colleagues noted that he knew the Ozark National Forest like the back of his hand, with access to archival topographic maps that marked forgotten sites ranging from abandoned mines to private bunkers from the Cold War. During the technical examination of Klein's home computer, cybercrime experts discovered a hidden partition on the hard drive protected by a complex password. After it was opened, detectives saw thousands of photos of Camille Harper. Some of them were taken from afar with a long focus lens over the past 3 years. There were pictures of her university graduations, walks in the park, and even photos from her wedding to Ryan. The most chilling discovery was the recovered files that Camilla thought had long since been deleted from her social media. Klein had spent years collecting every digital trace of the girl, creating a detailed archive of her life. On April 7, 2010, at 6:30 in the morning, the task force began a search of Klein's private garage, located on the outskirts of Harrison City. The building was located at a considerable distance from a residential building, which ensured complete confidentiality of any actions. The forensic report recorded a discovery that became a key link in the chain of evidence. Under the workbench in the corner of the garage, they found a pair of muddy size 11 hiking boots. Traces of dry clay on the soles were immediately sent for geological examination. The analysis confirmed that the composition of the soil was completely identical to the rare blue clay found in only one sector of the Boxley Valley, exactly where the bunker was located. However, the real horror awaited the detectives in a metal toolbox. There, behind a double wall, Trevor kept a supply of baby formula, diaper packs, and the very prenatal vitamins Camilla had mentioned. The presence of these items in the garage of an unmarried man who had no children was irrefutable evidence of his involvement in the girl's detention. Trevor Klein's interrogation lasted over 12 hours. Initially, he remained completely calm, but when Detective Wilson put in front of him the photographs of the vitamins found in the garage and the report on the identity of the clay, Klein, according to the report, changed in his face. His confidence vanished, giving way to nervous tremors. At 24 hours and 45 minutes on April 7th, Trevor Klein asked for a glass of water and said he was ready to tell the truth. From Klein's testimony recorded in his official confession, it became known about the events of August 23, 2009. He knew about Camille and Ryan's plans to go to Whitaker Point and was waiting for them in the brush near the trail. When the couple stopped to rest near Ponca Creek, Trevor went out to them. A sharp quarrel arose between the men. Ryan, defending his wife from Klein's aggressive attacks, tried to push him away. In response, Trevor pushed Ryan forcefully. The man stumbled on wet rocks and fell from a height of about 10 feet, directly onto the sharp ledges of the Rocky Creek bottom. He died instantly from a fractured skull base. Instead of calling for rescuers, Klein, in his own words, saw this tragedy as the chance he had been waiting for all his life. He intimidated the stunned Camilla with a weapon and forced her to go deeper into the forest. He carried Ryan's body to an abandoned ventilation shaft in an old mine half a mile from the scene of the fight and blocked the entrance with stones and branches. He led Camilla to a pre-prepared bunker in the Boxley Valley. In his testimony, Klein claimed that his actions were not kidnapping in the classical sense. He called it a rescue. In his twisted mind, Camilla was too vulnerable for this world, and Ryan's death allegedly gave him the right to become her new protector. He admitted that he had planned to keep her underground until she gave birth, hoping that having a child together and prolonged isolation would make her love him. He believed that they would eventually be able to surface as a new family, where he would raise the child, Ryan, as his own son. Based on Klein's testimony on April 8, 2010, a group of forensic scientists and rescuers went to the mine. At a depth of 15 feet under a layer of rubble, they discovered the remains of Ryan Harper. Nearby was his dark hiking backpack, which the police had been searching for 7 months without success. There were signs of a struggle on the victim's clothes, which fully confirmed the version of a violent death. When the news of Trevor Kline's confession reached the Harper family, a day of mourning was declared in the town of Jasper. The man who had held the victim's mother's hand for 7 months and helped search for the body he had hidden turned out to be a cold-blooded manipulator. The description of Kline's garage, filled with children's clothes next to cold torture tools, became a symbol of how deep human obsession can go. The investigation had all the evidence it needed, but Camilla's psychological trauma and Ryan's physical loss were a price no verdict could ever compensate for. Now that the mystery of the voice from the darkness had been solved, justice was preparing for the final stage, the trial that would put an end to this gruesome story. On February 20, 2011, the Newton County Courthouse in Harrison was surrounded by heavy police presence. The trial of 30-year-old Trevor Kline became the most high-profile event in the history of Arkansas in the last few decades. The courtroom could not accommodate everyone. Journalists from the country's leading TV channels and local residents lined up from 5 o'clock in the morning to see with their own eyes the man who turned the life of a young couple into an underground nightmare. According to court records, Trevor Kline was held in a special glass booth. Throughout the trial, he maintained absolute calm, which many witnesses described as cold detachment. He did not express remorse, did not look at the relatives of the deceased Ryan, and only occasionally made notes in a notebook. His face remained almost motionless, even when the prosecutor showed the jury photos from the Boxley Valley bunker and pictures of Ryan Harper's remains found in the mine. This absent expression caused a wave of disgust and indignation among those in the room. On February 22, 2011, the most tense moment of the trial took place, the testimony of Camille Harper. She entered the courtroom through a side entrance, accompanied by her lawyer and a psychologist. Almost 11 months had passed since her release, but the effects of her 7-month imprisonment were still visible. She had turned noticeably pale, and her movements remained stiff. However, unlike the first days in the hospital, her eyes no longer had that glassy stupor. According to the court chronicler, for the first time in a long time, Camille found the strength to look directly into the eyes of her captor. She was standing just 15 feet away from Kline. There was no rage or thirst for revenge in her eyes, only the deep, indescribable fatigue of a person who had seen a darkness inaccessible to others. Her testimony lasted over 3 hours. She described in detail the days in complete isolation, the system of the permission reflex, and the psychological pressure that Kline exerted on her, trying to erase her personality and replace it with his version of the ideal woman. The main argument of the defense was an attempt to present Kline's actions as a consequence of a mental disorder caused by unrequited love. However, the prosecution provided irrefutable evidence of methodical preparation of the crime. The investigation established that the purchase of canned food and the arrangement of the bunker began 2 years before the abduction. Kline studied ventilation schemes and reinforced the door with a bolt that could not be opened from the inside, which completely excluded the version of a spontaneous impulse. On February 25, 2011, at 14 hours and 30 minutes, the jury announced its verdict. After 8 hours of deliberation, Trevor Kline was found guilty on all charges: first-degree premeditated murder of Ryan Harper, kidnapping, and unlawful confinement in inhumane conditions. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence was read out, Kline only tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging receipt of another survey report. However, the court's verdict was only a legal point in a story that changed the lives of 2 families forever. After the trial, Camille Harper returned to her mother's house. In November of 2010, she gave birth to a boy named Ryan Jr. According to Patricia Harper, the child became a living copy of his deceased father. the same eyes, the same face shape, and a calm disposition. The baby has become the only bright memory of those 7 months in darkness, although Camilla still shudders when she hears sounds that resemble the grinding of a metal bolt. The Harper and Klein families, Trevor's parents publicly disowned their son, described their subsequent lives as eternal autumn. In an interview with a local newspaper a year after the trial, Ryan's father noted that justice had been served on paper, but the joy had disappeared from their homes forever. Where once there were dreams of 2 young people in love about sharing a home and traveling together, there was a void that no court verdict could fill. Today, the entrance to the bunker in Boxley Valley is covered with tons of concrete by the Forest Service to prevent it from becoming a pilgrimage site for sensation seekers. Whitaker Point Rock continues to attract thousands of tourists, but for locals, the trail along Ponca Creek will forever remain the place where Ryan Harper's last route ended. Camille Harper has dedicated her life to working with organizations that help victims of long-term abuse. She rarely appears in public and never visits the Ozark forest. For her, this story is not a script for a thriller, but a daily struggle with the memory of a voice in the darkness that promised salvation while keeping her behind a steel door. The Harper's story remained in the state archives as a reminder that the real danger sometimes lies not in the wild, but in the depths of human obsession, which can wait for years for its chance in the shadow of familiar faces.